My name is Fonda Marshall. I am 29 years old. And on my wedding day, just moments before the reception was scheduled to begin, I found my dad standing awkwardly in a hallway with absolutely nowhere to sit, while 9 people from my husband's family sat comfortably at the grand head table that was supposed to be his. Table 1, front and center. That is exactly where my parents belonged. Instead, someone had deliberately moved them to table 14, the absolute last table in the massive room, wedged tightly between the swinging kitchen door and a metal trash can. And when I confronted my husband-to-be and asked him why this had happened, I heard him say something about my father that aggressively cracked open every single lie I had been telling myself for 2 years. I stood in that carpeted hallway in my ivory wedding dress, with 200 expectant guests waiting on the other side of the wall, and I made a split-second decision that I cannot ever take back. And I absolutely wouldn't, even if I could. What I did, what he said, and what happened to his arrogant family after that night. That is the story I am about to tell you. Now, let me take you back to the early morning of June 14th. The absolute last morning I ever woke up as Garrett Whitfield's fiancé. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio. Population, 8,000. It is the specific kind of Midwestern town where the local pharmacist knows your blood type by heart, and the mail carrier actually remembers your dog's name. I grew up on Birch Lane in a modest, 2-bedroom house my father bought the exact year I was born. He paid off the mortgage in 22 grueling years. He wrote the very last check to the bank on my 16th birthday, and then took us all out to Dairy Queen to celebrate the victory. My dad, Dave Marshall, fixed pipes for a living. A plumber. 35 years wearing the exact same brand of heavy, steel-toed boots, which he had resold for separate times to save money. His knees completely gave out around year 20. His lower back followed suit around year 30. But I never, not once, saw him miss a single day of work when I was in school. He would come home exhausted at 6 p.m., scrub the dark grease off his calloused hands with that gritty orange soap that smelled like gasoline and bright citrus, and sit at the table to ask me what I had learned in school that day. My mom, Linda, worked the hot cafeteria line at Millfield Elementary. She tirelessly served lunch to 400 loud kids every single day, and she knew every single one of them by their first name. She knew exactly which ones were lactose intolerant, which ones had severe peanut allergies, and most importantly, which ones came to school hungry because there simply wasn't enough food at home. Those specific kids always got extra heaping helpings on their trays. Always. We were absolutely not wealthy. I shared a thin bedroom wall with a noisy water heater. My winter coat in 7th grade was my older cousin's hand-me-down from 2 years prior. But our front door was always open to neighbors. Dinner was always hot and on the table. And my parents never, ever made me feel like I was missing out on anything in life. I got myself through college on an academic scholarship and heavy student loans. I became a nurse practitioner working at the busy community clinic on Route 9. I aggressively paid off my entire debt by the time I was 28. I built that successful life with my own 2 hands. But the foundation of that life, that was Dave and Linda Marshall. I thought coming from a hardworking, honest family like that was more than enough for anyone to respect. I was dead wrong. I met Garrett Whitfield on a rainy Tuesday in October, exactly 2 years before the wedding. His father, Richard, came into my clinic for a routine physical, and Garrett had driven him. Garrett was casually leaning against the reception counter when I walked through the double doors holding a patient chart. He was tall, with dark hair swept perfectly back, and possessed the specific kind of sharp, confident jawline that looks like it was custom designed in a corporate boardroom. He smiled at me, and I will be completely honest, I smiled right back. We went out to dinner that Friday night, then again the next week, then every single week after that. Garrett was charming in a smooth, effortless way I wasn't at all used to. He opened heavy doors. He politely pulled out chairs. He took me to an incredibly expensive French restaurant in Columbus, where the cloth napkins were physically heavier than my winter coat. The Whitfields belonged to an entirely different world. They were massive, local real estate developers, 3 generations deep in wealth. Their family name was plastered on a luxury subdivision, a sprawling commercial plaza, and a heavy bronze plaque at the elite country club where they had been prime members for 25 years. They lived in a sprawling 5-bedroom mansion sitting on 2 manicured acres. Richard ran the massive company. Garrett successfully managed their acquisitions. His mother, Constance, aggressively chaired the Hope Foundation's prestigious annual gala and sat on 2 influential nonprofit boards. The very first time I officially met Constance Whitfield, she was wearing a cream silk blouse and genuine pearl earrings the size of dimes. She shook my hand limply, looked me up and down with calculating eyes, and said, "A community clinic nurse. How interesting." She then took a slow sip of her wine. "Garrett used to date the Harrison girl, Dr. Harrison's daughter, over at St. Luke's Hospital." She smiled when she said it, the specific, chilling kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all, but a warning. I naively told myself that was just how incredibly wealthy people talked in those elite circles. Stiff, performative. I convinced myself it didn't mean anything personal. Garrett squeezed my hand tightly under the table and whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, babe. She'll warm up to you." She never ever did. But by then, I was already deeply, foolishly in love. And love has a terrifying way of making you smoothly explain away the exact blazing red flags you should be sprinting away from. Garrett officially proposed 14 months later at a high-end steakhouse his family practically owned. He rented a private room, hired a string quartet, lit dozens of candles, and sitting just 3 tables away in the main dining room was Constance. Total coincidence, Garrett called it with a laugh. I said yes anyway, because the diamond ring slipping onto my finger wasn't from Constance. It was from the man who had driven 40 minutes in the snow to bring me hot soup when I had the flu. The man who texted me good morning every single day. The man who looked me in the eye and said my parents were good, hard-working people, and that he absolutely couldn't wait to call Dave Dad. Then the wedding planning officially started, and the charming version of Garrett I thought I knew started to violently blur. Constance aggressively chose the venue, the Whitfield Country Club, not the small, beautiful brick church on Maple Street where my parents were married. She chose the wedding planner, her close socialite friend, Diane. She unilaterally chose the dinner menu. And when my mom politely suggested adding her famous, homemade fried chicken as a fun, casual appetizer, Constance literally tilted her head, let out a patronizing sigh, and said, "That is incredibly sweet of you, Linda, but this is a formal, seated dinner, not a church potluck." My mother laughed it off gracefully, but I saw the exact way her calloused hands tightened nervously in her lap. Every single time I tried to push back against the takeover, Garrett had the exact same, exhausting answer. "Let Mom have this one, babe. It makes her happy. After the wedding, it's just going to be us. Our own house, our own rules." I wasn't a weak pushover. I want to be incredibly clear about that fact. I made a highly calculated, strategic decision. Lose the small, petty battles now, win the massive war later. The venue didn't actually matter to me. The menu didn't matter. What mattered was the actual marriage, the 40 years we would spend together after the expensive party ended. That was my internal logic. And it made perfect sense, right up until the moment I horrifyingly realized the small battles weren't actually small battles at all. They were rehearsals. Constance was actively testing exactly how far she could push me, and I just kept blindly giving up ground. I didn't know it then, but the wedding day wasn't the start of the war. It was the absolute last rehearsal. June 14th, 6 a.m. I woke up in my old childhood bedroom at my parents' small house. Warm sunlight filtered through the floral curtains my mom had sewn for me when I was 12. My wedding dress hung neatly on the closet door. Ivory satin, tea-length, bought entirely with my own hard-earned savings. Constance had heavily pressured me to buy a $10,000 designer gown from an exclusive boutique in Columbus. I politely but firmly declined. This dress was the one single thing I stubbornly kept for myself. By 10 a.m., I was at the sprawling Whitfield Country Club. The place looked exactly like a glossy spread in a bridal magazine. Hundreds of white peonies in tall crystal vases, imported ivory linens, heavy gold-rimmed chargers at every single seat, 300 glowing candles, and a 12-piece string ensemble warming up on the terrace. It was $85,000 worth of venue, decor, and high-end catering, mostly covered by the wealthy Whitfields. Mostly, 200 guests were expected to arrive. Exactly half were from the Whitfield side. Wealthy business associates, elite country club members, the local mayor's wife, the Hendersons, the Porters. The other half were mine. My Aunt Grace from Akron, 3 exhausted nurses from the community clinic, my old college roommate and longtime blue-collar neighbors from Birch Lane, people who drove beat-up pickup trucks, wore sensible department store dresses, and honestly didn't know what a charger plate was. I noticed the physical seating imbalance incredibly early in the day. The Whitfield guests completely filled the front rows for the ceremony, the center tables, the prime spaces closest to the massive dance floor. My people were noticeably scattered toward the dark edges of the room. Margot, my fiercely protective maid of honor and my absolute best friend since college freshman orientation, leaned into me during the processional rehearsal and whispered, "Fawn, why the hell are your aunt and your clinic people seated all the way in the back corner?" I waved her concern off, adjusting my veil. It's probably just a numbers thing. Their side physically has more guests. Margot raised a highly skeptical eyebrow, but she didn't push the issue. The beautiful ceremony went off flawlessly at noon. I walked down the long, flower-lined aisle. Garrett was waiting for me at the altar. He looked absolutely perfect in his tailored tuxedo. He always looked perfect. That was a massive part of the fundamental problem. I was so incredibly busy admiring the shiny, expensive frame, I completely forgot to check what was actually inside it. After the ceremony ended, while the guests filtered out onto the sunny terrace for the cocktail hour, I quickly slipped into the empty reception hall to check the final dinner setup. Call it a nervous habit. I'm an ER nurse. I verify absolutely everything twice. The massive room was truly gorgeous. 20 large, round tables draped in pristine white, with heavy gold place cards standing in tiny brass holders. Table 1, the prestigious head table, located directly in front of the polished dance floor and the stage. It was set for exactly 10 people. That is exactly where both sets of parents were supposed to sit, along with Garrett's elderly grandmother and my Aunt Grace. I walked up to table 1 and happily picked up the very first place card to check the spelling. Gerald Whitfield, Constance's brother. I frowned and picked up the next one, then the next. Lydia Whitfield, Thomas Whitfield, Mr. and Mrs. Porter, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, Patricia Whitfield Ross, Gerald Whitfield Jr. 9 Whitfields, and their wealthy business associates. 0 marshals. My chest tightened painfully. I started frantically checking the other tables. Table 2, Whitfield cousins. Table 3, country club board members. I kept power walking down the line. Table 10, Table 12. I finally found my parents at table 14, the absolute last table in the room, tucked tightly against the far back wall, sitting directly next to the swinging wooden kitchen door. I could clearly hear heavy pots and pans loudly clanging on the other side of the wood. The chairs at this table weren't the beautiful, polished mahogany chiavari chairs that matched the rest of the elegant room. They were cheap, padded, metal folding chairs, the backup kind you use for overflow. A dirty metal service cart, stacked with used water glasses, sat a mere 2 feet away. The overhead lighting above this specific table was noticeably dimmer than the others because it was a harsh utility fixture, not a crystal chandelier. Dave Marshall, Linda Marshall. I stared in absolute horror at those 2 place cards. Beautiful gold ink on cream stock, sitting on a cheap folding table directly next to a plastic trash can with a foot pedal. I spun around and found the wedding coordinator, Diane, holding a clipboard near the main bar. "Diane, Who changed the seating chart for the head table? She didn't even blink. Mrs. Whitfield adjusted it this morning. She explicitly said the bride approved the changes. I never approved anything, I hissed. I stood completely alone in that massive reception hall and did exactly what I had trained myself to do during mass casualty incidents in the ER. I aggressively triaged the situation. Table 14, a swinging kitchen door, clanging pots, cheap folding chairs, a trash can with a foot pedal sitting exactly 2 feet from where my hardworking father would eat his only daughter's wedding dinner. If I said absolutely nothing, here is exactly what would happen. My parents would walk in and find their seats. They wouldn't complain. They wouldn't cause a scene. My dad would quietly straighten his tie, the one he bought on sale in 2009, the absolute only good suit tie he owned, and he would smile at me and say, "It's perfectly fine, sweetheart. We're just happy to be here." My mom would politely fold her linen napkin in her lap and pretend she couldn't hear the industrial dishwashers loudly running 6 feet behind her head. And Constance would know. She would know with absolute, terrifying certainty that she could move Dave and Linda Marshall anywhere she wanted in life. The back of the room, the parking lot, out of the family frame entirely. And no one, especially not her son, and especially not me, would ever say a single word to stop her. Every Thanksgiving dinner after this, every Christmas morning, every future grandchild's birthday party, Dave and Linda would always, permanently be table 14. The blue-collar people who didn't quite fit the aesthetic. The embarrassing ones you quietly seat near the service entrance, so the important guests don't have to look at them while they eat. I thought about my dad's rough, scarred hands, 35 years of twisting copper pipe and spreading joint compound. He could miraculously rebuild an entire bathroom in a single day. He had saved for 6 long months just to buy that suit he was wearing. I thought about my mom's beautiful dress. She had painstakingly sewn it herself. She had meticulously altered an old, thrifted dress, added delicate lace at the sleeves by hand, and replaced the broken zipper. I had watched her work on it for 3 straight weekends, hunched over the humming sewing machine in the spare room, pins held between her lips, squinting through her glasses at the bobbin. These 2 people fed me. They raised me. They drove through blinding Ohio snowstorms to get me to school safely. And someone had casually decided they belonged next to a trash can. I turned on my heel and went to find Garrett. I genuinely thought he would fix it. I thought he would be absolutely furious on my behalf. I was dead wrong. For the second time that day, I found Garrett lounging in the luxurious groomsman's suite. He was standing casually in front of a full-length mirror, meticulously adjusting his expensive cuffs. Silver, monogrammed cufflinks. A morning gift from Constance. Garrett, who moved my parents off the head table. I demanded, my voice shaking with adrenaline. He didn't even look up from the mirror. Mom rearranged some things this morning. Fawn. It's really not a big deal. Not a big deal? They don't have seats at table 1, Garrett. Table 14 has their seats. Table 14 is next to the kitchen door. It is next to the literal trash. He sighed heavily, the specific, patronizing kind of sigh a person makes when they think you are just being hysterical and difficult. Fonda, we have 200 VIP guests out there waiting to eat. Can we please not do this drama right now? When then? I snapped. After dinner? After they've already sat next to a garbage can for 3 hours. He finally turned away from the mirror. His handsome face was perfectly calm, patient, the infuriating face of a man who had practiced looking perfectly reasonable while saying incredibly unreasonable things. Mom has her strategic reasons, Fonda. The Hendersons and the Porters are sitting at table 1 now. They're incredibly important investors. More important than my parents. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He stepped toward me and put his manicured hand gently on my arm. The gesture felt rehearsed. Baby, you're just stressed. It's your wedding day. Let's just get through this dinner smoothly. and I promise I'll talk to Mom about it tomorrow. Tomorrow. That was always his golden answer. Tomorrow after the engagement party. Tomorrow after the bridal shower. Tomorrow after the wedding. Tomorrow never, ever came. I searched his eyes desperately for something. Anger, guilt, surprise, anything that would tell me he didn't know about this cruelty until right now. There was absolutely nothing. No surprise. No outrage. He had known since the morning, maybe even longer. He fully knew Constance had banished my parents to the back of the room, and he had simply gotten dressed, fixed his cufflinks, and happily checked his hair in the mirror. I turned around and walked out of the suite without another word. I still had one more door to open. On my way back through the long corridor, I stopped dead at the welcome table near the main entrance. A neat stack of freshly printed wedding programs. Ivory cardstock, beautiful gold lettering, sat in a perfect row next to the leather guest book. I picked one up and flipped it open. Page 2, with love and immense gratitude to our families. Directly below that heading was a short list. Richard and Constance Whitfield, Gerald and Lydia Whitfield, Thomas Whitfield, the Whitfield Family Foundation. For distinct lines, all Whitfield. I frantically flipped the card over. Checked the back, checked the inside fold. Dave and Linda Marshall were nowhere to be found. In the original approved version, the specific proof I had signed off on 3 weeks ago, my parents were proudly listed first. With deepest love and gratitude to Dave and Linda Marshall, whose endless sacrifices made all of this possible. I had written those exact words myself. Constance had seen the proof. She hadn't objected to my face. She hadn't needed to. She just quietly waited until the morning of the wedding and had Diane secretly reprint them all. My parents' names were entirely erased, not just from the table, from the official record of the day. I found Margot standing near the bridesmaid's room, touching up her red lipstick in a compact mirror. One look at my ashen face, and she immediately snapped the compact shut. Fawn, what happened? I told her everything. The trash can, the program, Garrett's sickening reaction, all of it. 30 seconds, rapid fire, no pauses. Margot didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh my God," or uselessly tell me to calm down. She just closed her lipstick cap, dropped it into her clutch, and looked me dead in the eye. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." "Okay, what do you need from me right now?" "Stay close. I just need you here." "I'm here, Fawn. I'm right here." She didn't say, "I told you so." Margot had fiercely warned me about the toxic Whitfield dynamic 6 months ago. She warned me gently once, and then never brought it up again. She fiercely respected my choices, even the ones she vehemently disagreed with. That's exactly why I trusted her more than anyone else in that building. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew that the very next thing I needed to hear would decide my entire future. I walked back down the hall toward the groomsmen's suite. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping. I was going to try one absolute last time to stand in front of the man I loved and say, "Fix this right now, or I do not walk into that reception." The heavy wooden door was cracked open. 3 inches, maybe 4, just enough to hear absolutely everything inside clearly. Constance's voice spoke first, low, highly controlled, and dripping with venom, the exact way she always sounded when she was most dangerous. "Garrett, look closely at her father. That cheap suit is from 2005, and her mother, my God, did she actually sew that hideous dress herself? They look incredibly poor. You simply cannot have them sitting at the front table in all the photos. Our guests will think we're running a charity." "I know, Mom. I know." "The Hendersons are sitting right there. Jim Porter and his wife. These are the people who actually matter to our business, Garrett. Not, I'm sorry, but not a blue-collar plumber and a cafeteria lunch lady." "You're right, Mom. The Marshalls are totally fine in the back. It's more appropriate." A short pause. Then Constance spoke again, her voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet hiss. "You really should have listened to me from the very start, Garrett. She doesn't belong here with us. I pressed my trembling hand flat against the wallpaper. The entire hallway violently tilted. I heard my own pulse hammering in my ears. Hard, slow, like a heavy vault door being permanently locked from the inside. My father, the honorable man who spent 35 years on his bruised knees under strangers' kitchen sinks. The man who had 2 bad knees and 1 good suit. The man who willingly drove 4 hours round trip every single weekend to visit me in college, just because he thought the dining hall food wasn't nutritious enough. A plumber and a lunch lady. That is what they reduced him to. That is what they called her. And the man I was supposed to pledge my entire life to just nodded and said, "You're right." There are certain devastating sentences in life that you simply cannot unhear. This was absolutely not one of them. I stepped back from the crack in the door. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something deep and primal had gone completely, terrifyingly still inside me. It felt exactly like the chilling moment in the ER right before a patient codes, when all the chaotic noise drops away and absolute clarity takes over. I shoved the heavy door wide open and stepped inside. Constance spun around first. Her face completely froze in terror for half a second, maybe less. Then her features miraculously rearranged themselves into that chilling, perfect smile. The one that looked exactly like high society hospitality, but felt like a locked iron gate. "Fonda, sweetheart, you look absolutely stunning." "I heard everything," I said flatly. Garrett's jaw tightened in panic. "Heard what?" "We were just, Dad looks poor. Mom sewed her dress. They don't belong at the front table." I quoted verbatim, my voice made of ice. I held his panicked gaze. What part of that conversation did I misunderstand, Garrett? Constance stepped forward quickly, her hands clasped tightly together, assuming her charity chairwoman posture. "Fonda, dear, please. This is just a minor seating arrangement. We're simply trying to make sure." "You called my father a plumber like it was a dirty insult." I cut her off, stepping closer. "You called my mother a lunch lady, like she should be deeply ashamed of feeding children." "I didn't misunderstand a damn thing." "I didn't mean, and you," I snapped, turning my lethal gaze to Garrett. "You literally said they were fine in the back. You agreed that it was more appropriate." Garrett's voice immediately dropped. Smooth, calm, manipulative. The exact voice he used in high-stakes client meetings when a multi-million-dollar deal was rapidly going sideways. "You're just highly emotional right now, Fonda. It's your wedding day. Tensions are high. Let's just take a deep breath." "I am breathing perfectly fine, Garrett. I have actually never been more clear-headed in my entire life." Constance shot a quick, sharp look at her son, the specific kind of look that silently commanded, "Handle this mess immediately." Garrett tried to touch me again. "Baby, come on. Please, let's not ruin this beautiful night over a table." "I'm not ruining anything," I whispered, stepping entirely out of his reach. "You already did." I turned around and walked out of the suite. The hallway was dead quiet. 60 feet of polished hardwood stretched between me and the reception hall doors. Behind me, I heard Constance aggressively hiss something to Garrett, too low for me to catch. His footsteps didn't follow me down the hall. He didn't come running after me to stop me, and that was the absolute last answer I ever needed. I walked straight toward the reception hall, but I absolutely did not go inside just yet. I went to find the only person in that massive, sprawling building who had never, not once, made me feel like I wasn't enough. Margot was waiting exactly where I had left her, casually leaning against the polished wall outside the bridesmaids' room. She had her arms crossed defensively over her chest, watching the bustling corridor with the sharp, eagle-eyed focus of a sentry standing guard. "Tell me exactly what happened," she demanded softly as I approached. I told her every single detail, word for word. I repeated Constance's venomous voice, Garrett's cowardly, immediate agreement, and the horrific description of my parents as nothing more than a poor plumber and an embarrassing lunch lady who didn't belong in their elite society. Margot was dead quiet for 5 long seconds, her jaw ticking as she processed the sheer audacity of the betrayal. Then she looked me dead in the eye and asked, "What are you thinking, Fawn?" I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm thinking that I absolutely cannot sign my name to this life. I can't do it." She nodded exactly once. There was no theatrical drama, no dramatic gasping, no performative shock. It was just the hyper-focused, lethal expression she always wore when she stepped into a courtroom. "Okay, then here is exactly what you need to know right now," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, pulling me slightly away from the door. "The ceremonial part of the wedding is done, yes. But the actual legal marriage license? You haven't signed it yet. Diane, the wedding coordinator, still has the original document in her leather folio. The grand plan was to do the official signing after dinner, remember?" I did remember. Constance had aggressively insisted on making it a massive, theatrical moment. She wanted the bride and groom signing the legal documents at the sweetheart table in front of all 200 guests during dessert, treating the sacred legality of our marriage like an arrogant performance for her country club friends. "So," Margot continued, her eyes burning with fierce clarity, "legally speaking, Fawn, you are not married. The ceremony out there in the garden was entirely symbolic until that specific piece of paper gets signed in ink, properly witnessed, and officially filed with the county clerk. If there is no signature, there is absolutely no marriage. You won't need a messy annulment. You won't need a divorce. There is nothing legally binding you to that man. You can walk away completely clean." I let that massive, life-altering revelation sink into my bones. The officiant's poetic words, the tearful vows, the expensive rings sliding onto our fingers. None of it was legally binding yet. The absolute only thing that mattered was my signature on a single piece of paper currently sitting in Diane's folder. "How much time do I realistically have?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "As long as you simply refuse to sign," Margot answered immediately. "But Fawn, listen to me. Once you walk through those double doors, once the lavish toasts start, once Diane brings out that license and places a pen in your hand, the social pressure to sign it in front of 200 wealthy, expectant guests is going to be incredibly enormous. It will be suffocating. I know that. So, whatever you are going to do, you need to firmly decide before you sit down at that table." She reached out and placed her hand firmly on my arm. Her grip was warm and endlessly steady. "I am your lawyer, and I am your best friend. In that exact order tonight. Whatever you choose to do in the next 10 minutes, I am standing right next to you." I walked into the reception hall and immediately found my parents sitting at table 14. Dad was sitting rigidly upright, his calloused hands resting flat on his knees, holding the exact posture he always assumed when he was deeply uncomfortable but entirely too proud to ever show it. His suit jacket was securely buttoned. His tie was perfectly straight. He had meticulously polished his worn dress shoes that very morning. I could tell because they possessed that specific, dull shine that only comes from cheap, drugstore polish applied with a kitchen rag. Mom sat quietly beside him, nervously smoothing an invisible crease in her dress. She had painstakingly altered it herself, taking in the waist by hand, delicately adding lace to the sleeves, and replacing the faulty zipper. It was 3 exhausting weekends of dedicated work. I had watched her hunch over the humming sewing machine in our spare room, holding sharp pins between her lips, squinting through her glasses at the tiny bobbin. A harried server forcefully pushed through the heavy kitchen door directly behind them. It swung open with a violent bang, releasing a sudden, suffocating blast of kitchen heat and the deafening clatter of hundreds of stacking porcelain plates. Mom physically flinched from the noise. Dad didn't move a single muscle. "Hey, sweetheart!" Dad smiled warmly the exact moment he saw me approaching. "You look absolutely beautiful." I felt a massive lump form in my throat. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry about—" "Don't," he interrupted, holding up one sturdy hand to stop me. "I can sit absolutely anywhere, baby girl. This is your special day. It's our family's day. Don't worry about us." He looked up at me for a long, piercing moment. Something profound moved silently behind his eyes. It wasn't blazing anger, and it wasn't tragic sadness, but something infinitely quieter and much heavier. It was understanding. It was as if he already completely knew the heartbreaking truth that I hadn't even spoken out loud yet. I thought about the $12,000 currently sitting in the high-end catering company's bank account. My hardworking parents had sacrificed and saved that money over 15 grueling years. A little bit tucked away each month from a plumber's modest pension and a cafeteria worker's hourly paycheck. That exact money covered the massive catering deposit. It paid for every single plate of food, every poured glass of wine, and every decadent dessert that 200 wealthy guests would happily consume tonight. Without that $12,000, there was absolutely no dinner. And Constance Whitfield had callously put the very people who paid for the food next to the exact place where the garbage goes out. "Stay exactly right here," I commanded them gently. "Both of you. I will be right back." Mom reached out and grabbed my hand, her eyes pleading. "Fonda, please don't make trouble with them on account of us." I squeezed her hand tightly. "I'm not making trouble, Mom. I'm finishing it." The grand reception doors swung wide open. 200 guests filed elegantly into the room, guided by the soothing sounds of the string ensemble playing Pachelbel's canon like it was a lullaby designed exclusively for rich people. I watched silently from the shadowed edge of the room as they all found their assigned seats. The Whitfield side confidently settled into the luxurious front tables, with the effortless ease of people who have always been told they belong in the front. The Millfield side shuffled awkwardly toward the back of the room, double-checking their place cards and pulling out the cheap folding chairs that didn't quite match the elegant decor. The hired MC, Derek, who happened to be Garrett's arrogant college fraternity brother, stepped up to the microphone with a blinding smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a massive, warm welcome to the families of our beautiful couple." He gestured grandly toward table 1. The Whitfield family. 9 people proudly stood up. Constance beamed like royalty. Richard gave a modest, wealthy wave. Gerald and Lydia happily clinked their crystal glasses together. Thunderous applause erupted from the front of the room. Derek paused, glanced quickly at his index card, and smoothly moved right on. "And now let's raise a glass to love." There was absolutely no mention of the Marshalls. Not a single, solitary word. From across the massive room, I saw Nurse Patricia, my tough, no-nonsense charge nurse, the brilliant woman who had trained me in the chaotic hour, walking toward table 14, holding a small plate of appetizers. She abruptly stopped dead in her tracks, looked at the cheap folding chairs, looked at the swinging kitchen door, looked directly at my father, and then slammed her plate down on a nearby table. She marched straight over to where I was standing. "Fonda!" Her voice was low, heavily controlled, mimicking the exact, terrifying tone she used when a critical patient was actively coding on the table. "Why the hell are your parents sitting next to the service entrance?" "I'm handling it right now, Pat," I whispered. "That honorable man rebuilt the entire plumbing system in my house for half price when my pipes violently burst in January. He wouldn't even let me leave him a tip," she hissed angrily. "I know. So why is he sitting next to a literal trash can at his only daughter's wedding?" At table 1, Mr. Henderson, Jim Henderson, Richard Whitfield's absolute biggest, most crucial real estate development partner, leaned toward his elegantly dressed wife and whispered something quiet. She looked over her shoulder toward the absolute back of the room, then turned back to him, frowning deeply in confusion. People were finally starting to notice the blatant disrespect. The perfect, pristine seams of Constance's little production were starting to show. The extravagant first course was served. A rich butternut squash bisque poured into delicate white porcelain bowls. My parents' $12,000, beautifully plated and garnished with expensive microgreens. Constance abruptly left table one and began walking purposefully toward the main bar, her wealthy friend Vivian walking closely at her side. Their chosen path took them directly past table 14. I was standing near the towering dessert station, exactly 20 feet away. I was close enough to see everything clearly. I was close enough to hear every single word. My mother was nervously adjusting the delicate lace on her left sleeve. The homemade stitching had unfortunately come a little loose, leaving 3 inches of thread hanging visibly from her cuff. She was frantically trying to tuck it under discreetly with intense, embarrassed focus of someone who desperately did not want to be noticed by the elite crowd. Constance stopped directly behind my parents' table, looked down her nose at my mom's handmade sleeve, and then turned to Vivian. "Bless her heart," Constance sneered. "Someone really should have bought the poor woman a proper, respectable dress." She took a slow, arrogant sip of her expensive champagne. "But I suppose people like that just have to know their place in the world." She said it the exact way she said absolutely everything in life, with a terrifying hollow smile, at a volume that was technically meant to be private, but perfectly maliciously calculated to carry directly to my parents' ears. My mother's calloused hands went completely still. She instantly stopped fiddling with her torn sleeve. Her humiliated eyes dropped straight down to the cheap tablecloth. Dad didn't say a word. He just quietly reached under the table and took her trembling hand in his. He didn't cause a scene. He just held her. I have watched critical patients flatline. I have held a sobbing child while a doctor delivered a terminal cancer diagnosis to her devastated mother. I have witnessed gruesome things in the ER that would keep most normal people awake, crying for weeks. But watching my incredibly proud father, Dave Marshall, the absolute strongest, most honorable man I have ever known, sit completely paralyzed in silence and absorb that wicked woman's dripping contempt while hiding his wife's hand under a cheap folding table next to a trash can, that was undeniably the absolute worst thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. Because for the very first time in my existence, I saw him look ashamed. He wasn't ashamed of himself or of his honest life. He was deeply ashamed of the situation, of being forcefully put somewhere he fundamentally didn't deserve to be, and not possessing the financial power to fix it for his wife. I was done. I was completely, irreversibly, violently done. I aggressively crossed the room, grabbed Garrett's arm at the very edge of the polished dance floor, and practically dragged him behind a massive decorative column where the nearest table couldn't hear us. Your mother just publicly humiliated mine in front of her friends right now. I hissed, my voice trembling with pure rage. Garrett looked annoyed. What did she say? She told her friend to know her place. She said someone should have bought my mother a proper dress. Garrett ran his manicured hand through his perfectly styled hair, exhaling heavily. Fonda, come on. Mom says stupid things she doesn't mean when she's stressed. She means every single venomous syllable, and you absolutely know it, Garrett. Go over there right now. Tell your mother to apologize to them immediately. He looked at me as if I had just asked him to jump out of a window. Then he looked across the lavish room at Constance, who was laughing elegantly with Vivian at the bar. He looked at table one where the wealthy Henderson sat. He looked at the string ensemble playing something soft and expensive. He looked at the entire $500,000 empire his family commanded. Then he looked back at me. I'm not making a massive scene, Fonda, he said smoothly. 200 important people are watching us. Then go whisper it to her. I pleaded. I don't care how you do it, Garrett. Just be a man and do it. He straightened his tailored jacket, took a deep, steadying breath, and said the exact thing that permanently ended us. Your parents will be perfectly fine, Fonda. They're tough, blue-collar people. Let's just get through tonight and pretend it didn't happen. He turned his back on me and walked away. He walked straight back to table one, confidently sat down in his gilded, mahogany chair and smiled. Constance leaned over affectionately and patted his arm. He casually picked up his crystal wine glass and took a sip. I stood, completely alone behind the column, The string quartet gracefully shifted into a beautiful piece by Vivaldi. Waiters glided past me carrying massive silver trays of perfectly seared salmon. My $12,000 salmon. 200 people laughed, celebrated, and clinked expensive glasses in a breathtaking room where my parents didn't even have a chair worth sitting in. Garrett had made his choice. He chose the luxury table. He chose the wealthy room. He actively chose his mother over his wife. Now it was my turn. I marched straight to table 14 and sat down heavily in the empty folding chair. Not in the luxurious, floral-draped chair assigned to me at the sweetheart table. Not next to the groom. I sat down exactly between my parents. Mom looked at me, her eyes wide with confusion. "Honey, what are you doing? You should be up front with Garrett." "My family is back here, Mom. So I am back here." Dad studied my face intently. He had known me for 29 years. He could always tell when I was about to do something drastically unshakable. "Fonda!" His voice was quiet, incredibly careful. "Please don't do anything rash on our account." "I'm not doing this for you, Dad," I replied, my voice made of steel. "I'm doing this for me." I looked all the way across the massive room to the bridesmaids' table. Margot was already watching me like a hawk. I met her eyes and gave one single, decisive nod. She nodded right back. Then she reached under the table, grabbed her clutch purse, and immediately stood up. I took one deep breath, filling my lungs completely. Then another. Then I aggressively pushed back my cheap folding chair and stood up. The walk from table 14 to the main stage was maybe 60 feet in total. It took me exactly about 30 seconds. My heels clicked sharply on the polished hardwood floor, creating a sharp, steady rhythm that sounded exactly like a ticking metronome counting down to an explosion. A few heads turned in my direction, then more. The loud, joyous conversations didn't die all at once. They faded out slowly, table by table, like ripples moving backward across a pond. By the time I reached the stage, the entire room was almost dead silent. Derek, the arrogant MC, was mid-sentence into some boisterous, drunken anecdote about Garrett's wild college days. He saw me step up onto the stage and faltered completely. "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, the bride," he stammered, leading to a smattering of confused, scattered applause. I firmly took the microphone directly from his hand. He let go without an ounce of resistance. His face caught somewhere between profound confusion and a nervous grin. I looked out at the massive room. 200 expectant faces, glittering crystal glasses, pristine white linens, and heavy gold place cards. I saw Constance sitting at table 1, a glass of champagne frozen in her hand. I saw Garrett sitting beside her, looking confused. I saw Richard staring blankly at his plate. And way in the back, I saw my parents at table 14. From across the room, Constance leaned frantically toward Garrett. I couldn't hear her voice over the distance, but I could easily read her panicked lips. "What is she doing?" I adjusted the microphone stand, and I told them exactly what I was doing. "Thank you all for being here today," I began. My voice boomed through the massive speakers, completely clear and level. There was no pathetic tremor. There were no hysterical tears. I had spent 7 grueling years working in emergency rooms. I knew exactly how to stay terrifyingly steady when absolutely everything in the room was falling apart. I know you all came here today to celebrate a beautiful wedding. And because of that, I owe every single one of you the absolute truth about what is currently happening in this room. The last lingering murmur in the crowd completely died. 200 people went terrifyingly still. The silence was so profound, I could actually hear the clink of ice settling in someone's water glass at table 6. "Most of you in this room only know me as Garrett's fiancée," I continued. "But long before I was that, and long after tonight is over, I am Dave and Linda Marshall's incredibly proud daughter." I pointed a steady finger directly toward the absolute back of the room. "My parents are sitting way back there at table 14. I would like everyone in this room to turn and look at table 14 for a moment. Heads turned, all of them. 200 pairs of eyes swept away from the glamorous stage, looked past the crowded bar, past the lavish dessert station, past the swinging kitchen doors, and finally found Dave and Linda Marshall sitting awkwardly at a cheap folding table wedged between a dirty service cart and a plastic trash bin. I watched the visceral reactions move through the wealthy crowd like a sudden, violent weather system. Massive confusion first, then slow recognition, and then the sickening, horrifying tightening of faces as people finally understood exactly what they were looking at. Jim Henderson, the wealthy developer, slowly put down his silver fork. His wife, Carol, pressed her hand tightly over her mouth in sheer disbelief. Nurse Patricia, standing defiantly near the back wall, closed her eyes and shook her head once in absolute disgust. At table 1, Constance's fake, diplomatic smile hardened into something terrifyingly ceramic. Her knuckles went completely white as she gripped the stem of her champagne flute. Garrett sat perfectly still beside her, his jaw locked tight, his panicked eyes fixed solely on me. "Exactly 12 hours ago," I continued, my voice echoing, "my parents were formally assigned to be seated at this exact table. Table 1, right here in the very front, exactly where the loving families of the bride and groom are rightfully supposed to sit. That was the official seating chart that I personally approved." I let the heavy sentence sit in the air, letting them choke on it. But this morning, that suddenly changed. This morning, someone maliciously walked into this reception hall and completely replaced every single place card at the head table. My parents were unceremoniously removed from their rightful place and actively reassigned to the absolute last. Worst seat in this entire building. Next to the noisy kitchen. Next to the service entrance. Next to the literal trash. I paused. I let the horrific reality of the insult absorb into the minds of 200 people. And that specific person was Constance Whitfield. Every single head seated at table 1 violently whipped around to stare at her. Constance sat perfectly, rigidly still, her chin lifted in arrogant defiance, but all the blood had completely drained from her face. Richard Whitfield looked down at the white tablecloth in profound shame. He didn't move a muscle to defend her. "When I explicitly confronted my fiancé about this," I declared, my voice ringing out like a bell, "when I told him exactly what his mother had maliciously done to my family, he simply told me not to make a scene." I kept my voice incredibly even and factual, exactly like I was coldly reading a patient's medical chart out loud during hospital rounds. And when I accidentally overheard him speaking to his mother privately in the hallway just 30 minutes ago, he said, and these are his exact, verbatim words, "The Marshalls are fine in the back. The Hendersons and Porters are much more important people." Jim Henderson instantly pushed his heavy chair back from the table. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming exit, but it was just enough movement to aggressively create physical distance between himself and the toxic Whitfields. His wife stared at Garrett with a horrified expression that I instantly recognized from the ER. It was the exact look people get when they suddenly realize they have been standing right next to something dangerously contagious. Garrett jumped to his feet, his face flushed red. "Fonda, that's not, you're twisting my words." "Sit down, Garrett," I commanded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to yell. The absolute authority in my tone forced him to freeze. "You had your chance to stand up and be a man for my family today. You actively chose not to." He stayed nervously on his feet for 3 more seconds. Then Constance reached up, aggressively yanked his suit sleeve, and he cowardly sank back into his gilded chair. The massive room was so utterly quiet I could hear the kitchen door faintly creak on its metal hinge. My Aunt Grace, sitting furiously at table 11, put her hands flat on the table and loudly whispered, "Tell them, baby." "Let me tell you all exactly about the people who were banished to table 14 today," I said, turning slightly, just enough to see my father in my peripheral vision. He was sitting bolt upright, his massive hands resting on the table, his eyes shining with pride. fixed solely on me. My father, Dave Marshall, fixed broken pipes for 35 grueling years. He has 2 completely shot knees and exactly 1 good suit, the exact one he is proudly wearing right now. He had to save his money for 6 months just to afford it. A wealthy woman, sitting at table 9, aggressively pressed a linen napkin to her weeping eyes. My mother, Linda Marshall, tirelessly serves lunch to 400 hungry kids every single school day at Millfield Elementary. She knows every single child by their first name. She knows who is fatally allergic to peanuts, who can't have dairy, and who comes to school starving because they have no food at home. Those specific kids always get extra food from her. Always. I turned back to face the wealthy front tables, my eyes burning with righteous fire. My hard-working parents put $12,000 of their own money toward this extravagant wedding. They painstakingly saved that exact amount over 15 years. That money entirely covered the catering deposit. I let the brutal math settle over the silent room. People looked down at their expensive plates, looked at their crystal wine glasses, looked at the seared salmon and the butternut bisque they were currently eating. Every single plate of food you are eating tonight, my parents paid for it. Then I looked directly into Constance's terrified eyes. And you put them next to the garbage. The room completely fractured. Loud gasps erupted. A sharp, horrified intake of breath came from table 3. Vivian, Constance's supposed best friend, aggressively slammed her champagne glass down on the table and physically scooted her chair 6 inches away from the woman she had been laughing with just 20 minutes ago. From the back of the room, a man I didn't even recognize, someone from the Millfield side of the family, proudly stood up from his chair. Then Nurse Patricia stood up. Then my Aunt Grace stood up. They didn't scream or shout anything. They just stood up in silent, powerful solidarity like witnesses at a trial. Constance opened her mouth to speak, desperately trying to salvage her ruined reputation, but absolutely nothing came out. Garrett just stared miserably at his expensive plate. Richard Whitfield still hadn't moved an inch. I came here today fully intending to start a lifelong marriage, I said, my voice finally softening just a fraction. A true partnership, a life built on mutual respect and love. My voice didn't crack. I absolutely wouldn't let it. Not here. Not in front of her. But I absolutely cannot and will not sign my name to a legal marriage where my family is treated as a dirty embarrassment. I will never raise my future children to learn that love means hiding where you came from to appease arrogant people. I reached up and carefully unpinned my beautiful ivory veil from my hair. I folded it gently once, twice, 3 times. I set it neatly on the very edge of the wooden stage, exactly the way my mother had taught me to fold things with immense care, even when you are painfully letting them go. To all the wonderful guests who drove here from Millfield, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for celebrating with my family. But we're going home now. I looked at Constance's pale, ruined face one absolute last time. To the Whitfields, I genuinely wish you well in life. But I deserve infinitely better than a cowardly man who sits in silence while his mother calls my father poor. And my incredible parents deserve infinitely better than table 14. I set the heavy microphone back on the metal stand incredibly gently. There was no dramatic mic drop, no aggressive slam. I just placed it securely, the exact way a craftsman puts down a heavy tool when the grueling job is finally finished. I stepped gracefully off the stage and walked straight down the center of the room to the back. My heels clicked on the hardwood again, that exact same steady rhythm, 60 feet. This time, absolutely nobody dared to talk over it. Dad, proudly, stood up the exact moment I reached him. Mom was crying soft, quiet tears, the kind of humble tears she always tried to desperately hide from the world. I hugged them both fiercely right there, squished between the cheap folding chairs and the swinging kitchen door. Margot miraculously appeared out of nowhere with my winter coat and my overnight bag. She had already called a getaway car. We walked out of the venue, the four of us, heads held incredibly high, walking proudly past the lavish dessert station, past the silent string quartet, past 200 utterly silent, stunned faces. Behind us, echoing in the vast hall, I heard Constance's voice, incredibly brittle, loud, and panicked. "She's completely lost her mind." And I heard Garrett desperately calling out, "Fonda! Fonda, please wait." I didn't wait. The heavy oak doors firmly closed behind us, and the absolute last sound I heard was the peaceful, liberating rhythm of my own breathing. That exact night, I sat quietly at the worn kitchen table in my parents' modest house. It was the exact same table I had meticulously done my math homework on since the 3rd grade. It had a cheap Formica top, rusty chrome legs, and a massive chip in the corner from when I accidentally dropped a heavy cast iron skillet back in high school. Mom quietly brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Dad sat directly across from me and said absolutely nothing, which was his profound, comforting way of saying absolutely everything I needed to hear. At 9:15 p.m., Margot called my cell phone. "The marriage license is officially still unsigned," she confirmed triumphantly. "I just spoke with Diane, the coordinator. She still possesses the original, blank document. It was never signed, it was never legally witnessed, and it was never filed with the county. So, legally speaking, Fawn, you were never actually married to him. Not for a single second. No messy annulment required, no expensive divorce proceedings. Absolutely nothing. You walked away completely clean." I exhaled a massive breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 years. A huge knot in my chest instantly loosened. "There is slightly more," Margot added, her lawyer brain activating. "Under Ohio state law, since you officially cohabited with him, he may attempt to claim some shared property. But your apartment lease is solely in your name, and your bank accounts are completely separate. You are in an incredibly strong legal position." "Okay, thank God." "One more thing," Margot warned. "He has been aggressively calling me, trying to reach you. You have 17 missed calls from Garrett, 3 frantic ones from Constance, and 1 from Richard. Block all 3 of them on my account," I instructed firmly. "Already done." After Margot hung up, I sat in the quiet, safe kitchen for a very long time. Dad had already gone upstairs to bed. Mom was meticulously washing the coffee mugs in the sink by hand. Even though the dishwasher was completely empty, she always aggressively washed things by hand whenever she was deeply worried. My phone was finally, blissfully silent now. There were no more incoming calls, no more manipulative text messages alternating between "Baby, I am so incredibly sorry," and "You completely humiliated my family, you'll regret this." I absolutely didn't need his pathetic apology. What I needed was for him to have stood up like a man 6 hours ago and said, "That is my wife's family. Put them back where they belong." He didn't do it, and I couldn't magically undo what I had heard him say in that hallway. Mom dried the absolute last mug, set it perfectly in the wooden cabinet, walked over, and kissed the top of my head on her way to bed. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Fonda," she whispered. "Your father is too. He's just no good at saying the actual words." Exactly 2 weeks later, I threw up violently in the bathroom sink at 7 o'clock in the morning, then again at noon, and again at 4 p.m. I drove to the CVS on Route 9 and bought a pregnancy test. It was the exact same pharmacy where Gail, the kind pharmacist, had known me since I was 6 years old buying candy. She looked at the specific box, looked deeply at my pale face, didn't say a single judging word, just quietly rang it up and handed me the discreet plastic bag. Positive. 2 blindingly pink lines, incredibly sharp and absolutely unmistakable, glaring at me while I sat on the cold bathroom floor of my parents' house. I sat on the chilling tile and cried my eyes out, not the beautiful, joyous way I had always expected to cry if this miraculous thing ever happened to me. Not with overwhelming joy or surprise, or that breathless, cinematic gratitude people always describe in viral pregnancy announcement videos. I cried because my already chaotic life had just become 10 times more terrifyingly complicated. and I was sitting alone on a bathroom floor that still featured the exact same cheap grout my dad had installed back in 1998. I was going to be a mother, and the biological father was the exact man I had just rightfully walked away from in front of 200 people. The agonizing question came incredibly fast. Do I tell Garrett? The moral answer came even faster, yes. This innocent child had a fundamental human right to know both of its parents. But legally telling him didn't mean going back to him. It absolutely didn't mean second-guessing my decision in the reception hall. It didn't mean tragically trading my hard-earned dignity for a messy co-parenting arrangement wrapped in toxic Whitfield money. Mom found me sitting there an hour later. She came into the bathroom to grab fresh towels, saw the positive test resting on the counter, and went terrifyingly still. Then she slowly sank down and sat on the hard floor right beside me, cold tile, bad knees, and all. She didn't ask a single prying question. She just wrapped her warm, comforting arm tightly around me and held on. "You are not alone, Fonda," she promised fiercely. "You have never, ever been alone. I know, Mom. Dad is going to absolutely lose his mind." "In the good way," she chuckled softly, squeezing my shoulder. I almost laughed through my tears. Absolutely everything was infinitely harder now. But harder didn't mean wrong. And alone certainly didn't mean defeated. Not when I possessed a fiercely loyal mother who would willingly sit on a cold bathroom floor with me without ever needing to be asked. I officially informed Garrett by a brief, sterile email. Margot ruthlessly reviewed every single word before I hit send. It was exactly 3 sentences, highly professional, utterly final. "I am pregnant. I am keeping the baby. If you wish to pursue legal parental rights, all future communication must go strictly through my legal counsel." His desperate response came crashing in like violent waves. The very first email: "Please come home, Fonda. We will raise this beautiful baby together. We can easily fix this mess." The second email, sent 4 hours later in a panic: "My family will ruthlessly fight you for full custody. You have absolutely no idea what you are legally up against." The third email, sent at midnight in a drunken rage: "You are making the absolute biggest mistake of your entire life." 3 erratic emails. 3 completely different, unstable men. Pleading, threatening, predicting my ruin. All coming from the exact same cowardly person who couldn't even stand up to his own mother over a wedding seating chart. Then, Constance predictably called the house. She had acquired a brand new cell phone number because I had blocked her old one. So she bypassed my cell and tried the main house landline. Dad answered the ringing phone. I was standing frozen in the kitchen doorway. "Mr. Marshall," Constance began, her voice perfectly, terrifyingly measured and aristocratic. "I trust you fully understand that this unborn child is a Whitfield heir. We possess the absolute best attorneys in this entire county." Dad looked directly at me. I nodded firmly. "Mrs. Whitfield," Dad said, his voice a low, unshakable rumble. "My daughter has a brilliant lawyer. Talk to her. Do not ever call my house again." He hung up the phone, set the receiver down incredibly gently, and peacefully went back to drinking his black coffee. That very week, Margot connected me with her esteemed colleague Hannah Wells, ruthless, brilliant custody attorney based out of Columbus. Hannah was incredibly direct with me. "Ohio State courts heavily favor the primary caregiver," she explained. "You possess stable, lucrative employment, immense familial support, and absolutely zero history of mental instability or addiction. His family's massive bank account is not a valid legal argument for custody." I officially filed the necessary paperwork, doing absolutely everything through the proper, sterile legal channels. There were no screaming phone calls. There were no dramatic, tearful confrontations. There were no emotional, manipulative negotiations. Just cold, hard documents, strict court deadlines, and impenetrable boundaries. Constance had aggressively bragged that they possessed the best attorneys in the county. Maybe they actually did. But I possessed something incredibly powerful that she absolutely didn't anticipate. I was a woman who completely stopped being afraid of her on a Saturday afternoon in June. The corporate and social fallout for the Whitfields came incredibly quietly. There were no massive explosions, no screaming tabloid headlines. Just the slow, steady, agonizing erosion of absolutely everything the arrogant Whitfields had built their elite reputation on. Jim Henderson, personally, called Richard the following Monday morning. I obviously didn't hear the tense conversation firsthand. I heard about it later, secondhand, through Margot, who heard it from Hannah, who heard it from a talkative paralegal whose husband regularly played golf with Henderson at the club. Richard, I've been thinking heavily about the massive new development on Oak Ridge, Jim had said. I am simply not comfortable moving forward with the investment. Jim, what does a silly misunderstanding at a wedding have to do with a multi-million-dollar business deal? Richard pleaded. If that is exactly how your family maliciously treats the innocent people who are supposed to be closest to you, Jim replied coldly, I need to seriously reconsider how you would ruthlessly treat a business partner when the market gets difficult. Henderson completely pulled out of the massive Oak Ridge project, a lucrative mixed-use development worth, by local conservative estimates, somewhere north of $300 million in Henderson's share alone. Richard desperately had to scramble to find a new, willing investor. The entire project stalled aggressively for 8 long months. Exactly 3 weeks after the disastrous wedding, the Elite Hope Foundation board met behind closed doors. Constance had arrogantly chaired their prestigious annual gala for 6 straight years. She had undeniably raised more money than any previous chairwoman, but the board had suddenly received dozens of angry calls, wealthy donors asking uncomfortable questions, elite members expressing deep discomfort with the toxic optics of her behavior. Constance wasn't officially fired. That is simply not how these things gracefully work in small town, high society. She was politely, firmly invited to step back to focus entirely on her growing family. The massive gala went on beautifully in September without her name printed anywhere on the gold-lettered program. I absolutely did not orchestrate any of this downfall. I want to be incredibly, explicitly clear about that fact. I never once called Jim Henderson. I never contacted the charity foundation. I never posted a single, vague rant on social media. I never told anyone outside of Margot and my parents what truly happened in that hallway. I didn't have to. 200 wealthy, influential people watched Constance Whitfield maliciously put a hard-working plumber and a beloved lunch lady next to the trash. And 200 people went home and aggressively gossiped about it to everyone they knew. Severe consequences don't always arrive loudly with a microphone and a stage. Sometimes they arrive silently with a canceled phone call on a Monday morning. A month after the wedding, Garrett suddenly showed up unannounced at my parents' house. I was upstairs reading. I heard the sharp knock on the door, then the squeak of the screen door opening, then my father's booming voice. Garrett, Mr. Marshall, I came here today to apologize to you. I was hoping to talk to Fonda. She explicitly told you to go through the lawyers, son. I know exactly what she said, but I desperately want to say this to her in person. I should have handled things completely differently. I should have stood up for your family that night. Through the upstairs window, I could clearly see them. Dad standing on the porch, his massive arms resting easily at his sides. Garrett standing awkwardly on the front walkway. One step below, looking up pleadingly. You absolutely should have, Dad agreed firmly. Can I please just see her for 5 minutes? Dad didn't move an inch. He didn't nervously shift his weight. He didn't cross his arms aggressively. He just stood there, completely filling the doorway, the exact same way he had stood protecting every single doorway of my entire life. Solid, present, unmovable. My daughter made herself incredibly clear to you, Dad stated. If you wish to be a part of this unborn child's life, Hannah Wells has all the necessary paperwork. That is the only road you get to take. Garrett's handsome face tightened in anger. The polished corporate patience cracked violently just for a second, and something incredibly raw and ugly showed through. It wasn't genuine remorse, it was extreme frustration. The terrifying frustration of an arrogant man who was entirely used to getting his own way and fundamentally couldn't understand why the script had suddenly changed. "You are going to deeply regret this," Garrett threatened, his voice turning nasty. "My powerful family won't just let this insult go." Dad looked down at him for a long, silent moment. Then he said something I will absolutely never forget. "I'm not keeping anyone out of this house, son. I'm just keeping the door closed to disrespect." He took a step back inside and firmly closed the heavy door. It wasn't a violent slam, just a quiet click. The definitive, satisfying sound of a heavy latch falling permanently into place. I watched from the upstairs window as Garrett stood bewildered on the walkway, staring blankly at the closed wood. Then he angrily got into his expensive car and sped away. Dad never once mentioned the dramatic visit to me. That night at the dinner table, he simply passed me the mashed potatoes and casually asked me how my shift at the clinic went. 5 exhaustive months. That is exactly how long it took me to painstakingly build a brand new life from the shattered pieces of the old one. I found a modest apartment exactly 3 blocks away from my parents' house. It was a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor, costing me $850 a month. The carpet was a drab beige. The tiny kitchen possessed exactly 1 usable counter. The exhaust fan in the bathroom sounded exactly like a military helicopter taking off. But it was entirely legally mine. Mom came over with a yellow measuring tape on the very first day. By the end of that week, she had meticulously sewn beautiful curtains for every single window, cheerful blue gingham for the kitchen, crisp white cotton for the bedroom, and a soft, soothing yellow flannel for the small room that would soon be the nursery. Dad showed up bright and early on a Saturday morning, carrying his heavy metal toolbox. He expertly fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, completely replaced the old shower head, and reinforced the sagging closet rod. Then he spent 3 entire hours in the nursery painstakingly building a custom, beautiful wooden shelf out of reclaimed oak from a barn demolition in Fairfield County. He carefully carved a small, smooth groove along the top edge of the wood. There was no name etched into it yet, just a perfect notch where one would eventually go. I dropped down to working part-time hours at the busy clinic during my exhausting last trimester. My fierce charge nurse, Patricia, completely rearranged the entire staff schedule without me ever having to ask her. "You happily covered my brutal shifts for 6 weeks during my hip surgery," she stated firmly, waving off my gratitude. "This is absolutely nothing. Go rest." I absolutely won't romanticize the journey. There were terrible, dark nights where I sat alone on the beige kitchen floor and sobbed uncontrollably. Not because I ever regretted leaving Garrett. I never, not for a single second, regretted that decision. I cried because carrying and preparing for a child entirely alone is terrifyingly hard in ways absolutely nobody warns you about. The agonizing 2 a.m. leg cramps with no partner there to get you a glass of water. The sterile medical ultrasounds where the technician innocently asks, "Is Dad joining us today?" The beautiful, bittersweet baby shower my mom threw in her living room, where the absolute only empty chair was the one that would have rightfully been his. I consciously chose this path. I would fiercely choose it again. But actively choosing something morally right does not magically make it physically or emotionally easy. Single motherhood isn't a karmic punishment, but it certainly isn't a relaxing vacation either. It is just life, and I was bravely living it. Elise Marie Marshall came roaring into the world on a rainy Tuesday at exactly 6:14 in the morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, 10 perfect fingers, big, soulful brown eyes, and a powerful scream that practically shook the delivery room walls. Marshall. I proudly gave her my last name, my parents' honest name, the name of a hardworking plumber and a dedicated cafeteria worker who never, not once in their lives, made their daughter feel like she wasn't enough. Dad held her first, right after me, right after the nurses cleaned her. His massive, rough, Calloused hands cradled her tiny body like she was made of the most fragile, blown glass. He didn't speak a single word for a full, emotional minute. He just stood silently by the hospital window with the golden morning light hitting his face and this miraculous baby in his arms, just breathing her in. Mom took photos, 47 of them. I counted them later on her phone. Exactly 2 weeks after Elise was born, a heavy envelope arrived in the mail at my apartment. There was no return address printed on it, but the stationery was incredibly thick and expensive. The kind of paper you buy at a specialty boutique, not a local drugstore. I instantly recognized the elegant handwriting from the extravagant Whitfield holiday cards Garrett used to show me. It was from Richard Whitfield. I opened it while standing at my kitchen counter, with Elise sleeping peacefully in her bassinet just 3 feet away. Fonda, the letter began, I deeply owe you a profound apology, not for what my arrogant wife and my cowardly son did to you, but for what I failed to do. I was sitting in that room. I saw the seating chart change that morning. I heard the toxic conversation in the hallway, and I cowardly said absolutely nothing to stop it. That devastating silence is entirely on me, and I will rightfully carry the shame of it to my grave. I do not expect your forgiveness, and I am certainly not asking for access to my beautiful granddaughter. But if there ever comes a distant day when you would allow me to meet her, I would be eternally grateful. I read the shocking letter twice. I folded it neatly, walked to my bedroom, and placed it in the nightstand drawer right next to Elise's tiny hospital bracelet. I didn't reply to him. Not that day, not that month, and not that year. Maybe Richard was genuinely, truly sincere in his remorse. Or maybe this was just another calculated, legal strategy orchestrated by their lawyers. I genuinely didn't know, and I was completely done making massive life decisions based on naive hope. This time I decided I would just let time answer question, not wishful thinking. 1 year later, Elise is a vibrant 13 months old. She has my big, expressive eyes and her father's stubborn, strong jawline, and a joyous laugh that sounds exactly like a tiny hiccup played through a cheap speaker. I am back working full-time at the clinic. Last month, they officially promoted me to shift lead. The new title came with a $2 hourly raise and a heavy set of brass keys to the main supply closet. I have honestly never been more profoundly proud of a set of keys in my entire life. The apartment still features that boring beige carpet and exactly one usable kitchen counter, but the blank walls are completely covered now. Framed photos of Elise laughing at the local pumpkin patch. Elise wearing her grandpa's oversized reading glasses on her head. Elise gleefully smearing mashed sweet potato completely across her mom's clean apron. The beautiful, sturdy oak bookshelf my dad built now proudly holds 32 colorful children's books and one single, framed picture of my parents on their wedding day in 1991, standing joyously outside the little brick church on Maple Street. The tense custody arrangement finally went through the family court system in October. Garrett legally gets 2 supervised weekends a month. He picks Elise up at 9 a.m., and he returns her safely by 5 p.m., on time every single time. I will absolutely give him credit for that much. Constance is explicitly not part of the legal arrangement, not because I maliciously banned her from seeing the child, but because I set one strict, non-negotiable legal condition. Any visit with the extended Whitfield family requires my physical presence or my parents' direct supervision. Constance haughtily called it a vile insult. I called it a healthy, necessary boundary. She hasn't met Elise yet, not because the door is locked to her, but simply because she stubbornly refuses to walk through it on anyone's terms but her own arrogant ones. Garrett and I communicate exclusively through a sterile, court-monitored, co-parenting app. Short, factual messages, pickup times, doctor's appointments, absolutely no small talk, no toxic arguments, just pure logistics. He's noticeably different on handoff days now, much quieter. He holds Elise just a little bit longer before reluctantly handing her back to me. Once, I saw him deeply smell the top of her soft head, close his eyes in pain, and something in my chest actually ached. Not for him, but for the honorable version of him that might have existed if he had only been brave enough to choose differently on a Saturday afternoon in June. Sunday dinner at the Marshall house. 6 p.m. sharp. The exact same as every single week since I proudly came home. The dining table is the exact same one I grew up doing homework on. Formica top, rusty chrome legs, that familiar chip in the corner. There are 6 chairs surrounding it, and not a single one of them matches. Dad's is a heavy wooden rocker he stripped and refinished from a neighborhood yard sale. Mom's has a bright, floral cushion she crocheted herself in 2004. Mine is a sturdy metal folding chair from the garage, the good kind with a padded seat. There are absolutely no gold place cards here, no imported chargers, no live string quartet. Mom made a massive batch of her famous fried chicken, the exact same recipe constants arrogantly cut from the fancy wedding menu. We have creamy mashed potatoes made entirely from scratch, hot corn on the cob, specifically because Elise loves to hold the cob in her hands, even though she doesn't have nearly enough teeth to actually eat it yet. Margot is here, bringing her new boyfriend Tomas, a kind man whom she met at the courthouse last spring. Nurse Patricia came, too. She brings a fresh, homemade pie every single Sunday now, loudly claiming it's just because she bakes too much at home. Nobody at the table actually believes her, and nobody cares because the pie is delicious. Elise is currently sitting happily in Dad's lap, aggressively grabbing at his glasses. He lets her do it. He always lets her do it. You know, he says to her, leaning in close and quiet, like he's sharing a massive, important secret just with her. Your grandpa used to fix dirty pipes for this entire town. But now I just fix things exclusively for you. She gleefully throws a plastic spoon onto the floor. Everyone at the table laughs, loudly. I look around the warm, crowded table. The overhead kitchen light buzzes just a little bit. Dad swears he'll finally fix it next week. The floral wallpaper in the hallway is peeling slightly at the seam near the door. There's a persistent, freezing draft from the back door that Mom desperately covers with a rolled-up bath towel from November to March. There's no expensive champagne, no sparkling crystal glasses, no $85,000 venue. But every single person sitting at this mismatched table actively chose to be here. Every single person belongs here. And absolutely nobody is sitting next to the trash can. This is my table one. I am not telling you this long story to preach or to forcefully teach you anything. Everybody's personal situation is wildly different. Everybody's emotional breaking point is different. And I obviously don't know the specific details of your own table 14. But if you are currently sitting in one right now, if there is a space or a relationship in your life where you are constantly, purposefully put in the back, always placed near the exit door, always made to feel like you should just be pathetically grateful for the cheap folding chair instead of rightfully asking why it is positioned next to the garbage, I want you to know something incredibly important. You can stand up. You do not need a loud microphone. You do not need 200 shocked witnesses. You don't need a brilliant, shark-like lawyer standing in the hallway, or a massive, protective father physically blocking the door for you. You just need to know deep in your bones, pushing past the heavy doubt, past the manufactured guilt, past the toxic inner voice that begs you to just don't make trouble, that the people you genuinely love deserve infinitely better. And if the person you specifically chose to spend your life with quietly agrees when someone maliciously calls your family poor or unworthy, that person didn't actually choose you. They chose easy convenience. They chose a comfortable life. They chose the coward's version of love, the kind that absolutely doesn't require an ounce of courage to maintain. And that is not true love. That is just a seating chart. My name is Fonda Marshall. I am 30 years old now. I am a dedicated nurse, a fierce mother, a proud shift lead, and Dave and Linda Marshall's extremely grateful daughter. I live in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment with cheap beige carpet and a magnificent wooden bookshelf my dad lovingly built from reclaimed barn wood. My beautiful daughter laughs exactly like a hiccup, throws plastic spoons happily on the floor, and has never, not once in her entire life, sat at a table where she didn't fully belong. And I have never, ever been prouder of exactly where I come from.